So needless to say, a lot of stuff broke over this weekend in racing, so that's what we're going to talk about in this edition. First off, we're going to be talking about the Daytona International Speedway track record. No, not on the oval, but on the road course, and the fact that it's very much in jeopardy because it was broken unofficially over the weekend. We're also going to be talking about NBC finally promoting the Indianapolis 500. It's nice to have a TV partner that is actually willing to step up on a big stage. We'll have more information and a little bit of discussion on that topic. We're also going to talk about the rumor that is surrounding the IndyCar series and a potential new title sponsor from Japan that is already associated with a current team. Now, one thing I'm not going to talk about in this video because I talked about it in the last video, and even though it's been made official today, my thoughts haven't changed at all on it, and that is Daniel Suarez being confirmed at the 41 car for Stewart-Haas Racing. Again, it was something that we knew going into last weekend. That's why I did it on Friday, on the Friday show. So if you want to hear my thoughts on Daniel Suarez, particularly about whether or not he's going to be an Eric Almirola or a Danica Patrick at Stewart-Haas Racing, if that interests you, head over to that previous video and then come back here and listen to some sports car and IndyCar talk because it's going to be a lot of fun. So the Daytona road course track record has stood for 25 years. The track record holder currently is P.J. Jones in that beautiful Toyota Eagle Grand Touring prototype car. But by the time we get around to the Rolex 24 this year, it looks like we are going to have a new track record as Mazda Team Yost, in the hands of Olivier Jarvis, went half a second faster in Roar before the 24 testing, and he was 2 seconds faster than Philippe Nasser went last year during the Roar before the 24. So it's very exciting to be seeing a modern race car actually be able to top one of the beasts from 25 years ago. And why has this gain been made? I think a lot of people are probably going to be wondering this who aren't really in the know and up to date on what's going on in the world of IMSA. So why the speed? Why is suddenly the Daytona Prototype International cars, which are based, of course, on LMP2 cars, going as fast as GTP cars? And the short answer, well, there's a couple of answers. The first and probably the smallest gain is the Daytona Prototype and LMP2 split. Of course, they're going to be running in different classes despite being based on the same basic formula, but the fact that the DPI cars no longer have to be balanced to meet the criteria of the very much spec nowadays LMP2 cars allows a little more wiggle room in the regulations for the DPI cars to really kind of gain a little bit more horsepower or maybe lose a little bit of weight. And so there's a little bit of gain there. But the major gain, and if you've listened to some of the interviews with the drivers, this will be made abundantly clear, is the switch from Continental tires to Michelin tires. Now, all cars in IMSA for this year will be running on the Michelin tires. It's required in the prototype divisions as well as GTD, but it's optional in GTLM. However, all of the teams choose to run Michelin tires. So last year and all the years previously, especially at Daytona, in fact, the last time there was an open tire formula at Daytona, correct me on this if I'm wrong, I think it was 2001. So it's been an awfully long time since there was any kind of real development from the tires. And in fact, I think the tires that ended up becoming the spec tires were the Pirellis, and then they became Hoosiers, and then they became the Continentals. They were actually the same tires essentially produced for about a length of 10 years. And obviously tire technology has advanced a significant amount in that period of time, and Michelin, obviously, by their record across the board in terms of victories on the international sports car stage, is certainly the top manufacturer, at least at this point in history. So the fact that Michelin has brought a very strong tire to the prototypes, which they have not had for 5 years. I mean, if you go back to the ALMS days when they actually had access to Michelins and Dunlops, they were significantly faster, but they didn't run at Daytona. Now, there's a little bit of confusion as well about the track record. Aside from the fact that it's unofficial, the Mazda does not have the track record. I mean, you can go as fast as you want in private testing, but the way racing has always seemed to work is that to set an official time, you have to do it in an official race. So at the moment, the Toyota still holds the track record, but assuming it doesn't rain, and boy, wouldn't that be a wet fart, we're going to have a big track record. And it's going to be something to watch this entire season as well, because if you think about Daytona's road course, there aren't really a whole lot of corners. There's really kind of the two horseshoes and then the bus stop on the backstretch. And outside of that, it's mostly banking. So when you consider that they gain 2 seconds on a track where they are artificially limited by IMSA key to, or at least in favor of the Daytona insurance, which limits cars racing there to around about 200 miles an hour. IMSA keeps it right at 200 to make sure that they don't have any insurance issues racing in Daytona. But when you consider that the Daytona, or the Toyota Eagle, which set that first track record, or what set the current track record, was not artificially limited. They could go 230 miles an hour around the banking if they so chose, and I think they did, by the way. So it's all being made up in the corners, and there aren't that many corners at Daytona. So what will happen when they get to Sebring, or what will happen when they get to Road Atlanta or Watkins Glen, where there's a lot more corners, where there's a lot more maintaining of speed, or where speed is found on the track is maintaining it through fast sweeping corners or being able to get the power down out of hairpins easier. So at least at Sebring, I believe the track record for P2 cars, I'm going to throw the P1 cars out at the moment. I think it's like the Porsche RS Spider from 2008 is the track record holder, and they're somewhere in the range of 10 seconds faster than the previous lap mark, or previous year's lap mark in IMSA that was set by, I think it was ESM, or maybe it was Visit Florida. I couldn't remember. It was one of those two teams that was on the pole position. 10 seconds faster. And if you think they gained 2 seconds at Daytona and they don't have that top speed, I would say that they probably, especially because it'll be warmer conditions and maybe track conditions will be a little bit more conducive to fast racing, you know, they could go as many as 10 seconds. I mean, it's crazy to think about, but if you think about if they gain half a second in each corner, which, depending on how bad the Continental tires theoretically were, there could be some huge gains made. By the way, because I'm wearing the Mazda Team Yost hat, I will say it looks like that Yost Racing, who runs the Mazda program and took it over, I think, in the middle of 2017, they've really finally kind of found it. They probably should have won Petit Le Mans. They actually probably should have won Sebring last year. They didn't either time. But this pace clearly is a statement from them. So it'll be interesting to see where they stack up against the fleet of Cadillacs that are racing this year, as well as the Mazda, or the Acura team, obviously run by Team Penske. And then, of course, we've got the Core Autosport Nissan, which that car in particular is going to be one to watch because it's a one-car effort this year. The Patron team obviously closed down and Core took it over. They're only going to run one of the Nissan Legers. So, yeah, I couldn't be more excited about Daytona. It's only 2 weeks away, and hopefully, again, it doesn't rain in qualifying, so we'll see one hell of a track record. Your eyes were not deceiving you. NBC Sports kept to their promise and ran a 15-second ad on the Bears-Philadelphia playoff game for, of course, the NFL playoffs. It was on the Indy 500, and yeah, it's just one of those things that's crazy to think about. And it's certainly something, I'll apologize a little bit to those of you in higher up IndyCar management that I've been tweeting at the last couple of weeks, because we haven't expected this as IndyCar fans, and I certainly think the IndyCar competitors, the people in the sport, certainly want this as well, is the TV company to activate, to promote, to try to get more viewers into the series, more people watching, more people aware of what's going on. And so an advertisement like this is very exciting for everybody, especially going out in prime time on an NFL game. And by the way, an NFL game that really of the week is the most talked about. Everybody's talking about that missed field goal at the end of the game. Well, guess what? Everybody tuned in for that game. They saw that advertisement. Now, a little bit of devil's advocate here. Yes, it was only about the Indy 500. I think it was the right play, and I'm not just saying that because I'm going to be one of those pessimistic people who's like, well, the Indy 500 is the only important IndyCar race. Not necessarily, but I think from a reintroduction standpoint, essentially, really, what NBC's task here is to reintroduce the country to the Indy 500 and to IndyCar racing. And really, ultimately, the first thing that's going to play to that mindset of Joe Sixpack who's watching the Bears and the Eagles, they're going to know what the Indy 500 is. Even if they've only heard of it in passing, they are going to know what that is. If you go there and say, hey, St. Petersburg is in March in a couple of weeks, they're just going to go, oh, okay. But if you say, hey, the Indy 500 is coming to NBC, they'll go, the Indy 500? I know what that is. And I think the ad itself, I mean, it's on the scale of Daytona Day and the Target Alex Zanardi ads, it's certainly further on this side of things. It wasn't spectacular, but it did exactly what it needed to do. I'm not going to go out and say it's the best commercial in the entire world, because it wasn't. But I think it was an effective teaser trailer. I think that's kind of what they were going for. They were just trying to get people kind of like, just make them perk up a little bit. And again, I really wanted them to do this, and I'm very ecstatic that they are doing this, because again, I've been kind of a dick on Twitter to NBC, and I was a dick in the, I'll own it. I was, very outspoken against them at Sonoma, because, I want to hold NBC Sports accountable, and I think we should all hold them accountable, especially because if they're going to come out and talk a lot and say, we got big plans, we got big ideas, we're going to really promote this, we really want it to succeed. We have heard that sort of thing before from title sponsors or teams or other sponsors or TV partners, ABC. We've heard that before, and then they don't deliver. So full credit to NBC. I don't want to fire everybody. You guys actually, are holding true to your word at the moment. Now, granted, it is one advertisement on one playoff game, but this is a good sign. I do wish that NBC had the Super Bowl this year, because I would love to see an Indy 500 Super Bowl ad. I think NBC has one of the championship games this year, AFC, NFC, so hopefully there'll be some sort of Indy 500 promotion on there. And also, by the way, I think part of the fact that we're only starting to see promotion now isn't necessarily because NBC didn't want to start promoting. I think maybe they weren't allowed to promote on big NBC until the turn of this year, because ABC might have held on to some sort of contract, and you don't want to mess with the mouse. But again, this was an effective thing. Credit to NBC. They did it. But you may have noticed something in this advertisement, and it may have been coincidental, or it may have been intentional, because a lot of the footage was stuff they had shot at the first test for the teams with James Hinchcliffe and Scott Dixon in the fall of 2017, spring of 2018. I can't remember exactly when it happened. But Scott Dixon was in a car sponsored by NTT Data, and that's why he had that on his visor strip. But it's interesting that NTT Data had such a prominent place in this particular advertisement. In fact, it was the only prominent sponsor you could see. Why was that? Well, that's what our next story is. So Adam Stern reported on Twitter, and he has been incredibly good the last couple of months at getting things right, that a Japanese company was interested in becoming the title sponsor of the IndyCar series. That title sponsor is Ganassi Racing sponsor NTT Group. Now, it's not NTT Data, though it's owned by NTT Group. It's a bit confusing to say it that way, but NTT Group is the larger conglomerate, which is based in Japan, which owns NTT Data. How about that? And it seems like, again, Stern is pretty much batting 1,000 in terms of his ability to call this sort of a thing, or at least report on this sort of a thing. So I think it's going to happen. I think we are looking at the NTT IndyCar series for next year. So whenever this is announced, it seems like it's going to be announced fairly soon. I think they're going to need to announce it fairly soon to get the merchandise all updated with the new logo and whatnot, if they're interested in doing that. But some people have said it's another bad announcement for Chip, because some people have been saying that Chip Ganassi, this looks like an awful lot like a sponsor poach. I'm not going to go that far. I've thought about it. I definitely put my tinfoil hat on for a little while, thinking, could this be a sponsor poach? Are they going to steal a sponsor essentially away from Chip Ganassi? And Lord knows Chip Ganassi is not having a good month with sponsors. I'm not necessarily convinced. Here's why. I think we have seen in the past, especially in recent racing circles, that title sponsors aren't necessarily opposed to also sponsoring a car in the series. We saw that with iZod, we've seen that with Verizon, and now we might end up seeing it with NTT Data. And then we've seen it also on the NASCAR side with Monster Energy. So it's really just going to depend what NTT's goals are themselves. And I think that they are going to be willing to also sponsor the series themselves, because the American branch is the one that's sponsoring Chip Ganassi Racing. So essentially you're going to have American NTT in the series, Japanese NTT as the title sponsor. I think that's kind of how the Verizon deal works, by the way. I think it's a slightly different way that Roger Penske gets his funding from Verizon than the way the series did. I think I remember something like that happening, and I think that's the way it is for Monster Energy as well. This would be a business-to-business deal, so what they would be doing is, shuttling VIPs in and giving them a good time in exchange for the title sponsorship. You would hope that it's about the same amount of money that Verizon was paying, which I think was $5 million a year, which seems a bit paltry, but I mean, that's the climate we kind of live in. I guess they're lucky to get that. It is a bit disappointing that it's not a title sponsor that can be purchased or supported by the General Joe somebody, but again, why are you going to turn down the cash? And here's another thing that I kind of thought about, especially because it's a Japanese title sponsor. You don't think that Takuma Sato's Indy 500 win was an important milestone for the series? You've got to think that there was a connection made at some point, or at the very least, the NTT group kind of perked up when they discovered that a Japanese driver had won the Indianapolis 500, and they said, oh, hey, we're in that series. Maybe we should talk to those people. Now, let's look way far ahead. Let's say this happens. Let's say it is indeed the Japanese that are really into this and wanting to get behind it. How much longer until we go back to Japan and have a race there? I'd love to see Twin Ring Motegi come back. I don't know how feasible that is, especially considering some of the things that have been said about what the earthquake did to that track, even though Takuma Sato did do some demonstration laps in his Indy 500 winning car, I think, last year. So I don't know. A demonstration lap is a little bit different than 26 Indy cars going around there at 220 miles an hour. But that's something that could be in the potential cards for the future in terms of NTT Group sponsoring the series. So again, I probably, as soon as it's announced, I'm going to do a full in-depth video on that particular subject. So I figure I'll just leave it for now, but I figure I'd let you know because it's probably going to be coming out within the next couple of days if it indeed is happening. And again, I trust Adam Stern. He's a good reporter. So that has been This Weekend in Racing. I hope you've enjoyed it. I know you IndyCar and sports car fans love me talking about that stuff, especially the sports car fans. I hope you enjoyed a little bit of extended coverage, and we're going to have a lot of extended coverage throughout this month because of the Rolex 24 at Daytona. So thank you guys so much for watching. This has been David Land on YouTube, and we'll see you in the next video.